Guys, welcome down to the channel. Thanks very much for watching. Today's video is all about the GEM golf training aid. If you've seen my first video on this, you'll know that I absolutely love this training aid. It's a training aid that I actually use myself when I'm practicing and when I'm hitting golf balls. I sometimes use it for kind of hitting a few balls pre-round as well, because what it helps me do is get the feeling of where the club should be at takeaway and where the club should be kind of waist height post impact as well. So it really helps you get that sensation of the release. Now what today's video is going to be about is how we use it for chipping. Okay, so in the very first video you'll see me use the different length rods and the weighted ball as well, which kind of helps get the weight correct to put the club into position. Now we don't use that necessarily for chipping, but you can do, because what I used that recently with a client for was actually just getting the sensation of where the club needs to be, but also he kind of had this tendency to keep the club face really closed. I wanted him to understand that just by kind of getting the club into what is a good takeaway position, that's also a fantastic position for the takeaway to be in for a chip shot, because the weight at the bottom of the club helps the toe stay up. So it allowed him to kind of hit some higher chip shots. So you can definitely start to use that whilst you're kind of practicing and understanding where you should be for your short game, but for your long game, sorry, but also take that into your short game. Now, when you're using the rod and the ball, you don't actually hit golf balls. You kind of practice swing with it, take the rod and the ball off, and then go ahead, hit a couple of shots and put the rod and the ball back on. Now, how you practice with this is basically we turn the clamp around and the very small rod just pokes up, okay? And all that's going to do is basically in line with the face, in line with the leading edge, and as I take the club back, that's my first reference point. So rather than bothering with the face, I'm just going to look at the rod there, and I want to try and get the black hole of the rod pointing straight up to the sky on the way back and on the way through. And actually with this I can hit some golf balls, so I can get the club going back and I get the club going through, making sure that I keep the rod and keep the black hole of the rod pointing upwards. Now, the one common thing that I see is golfers rotating the body but getting scared to really move the hands. They try and get really stiff-wristed. Now, all that's going to do really is hit the ball super low. Now, in fairness, let's be fair, that is a good golf shot to have in your arsenal. You want to have that kind of nice low chip and run shot, and I kind of use it as a bit of a stock chip sometimes, where I just kind of stay a little bit more rigid in the hands and just kind of make sure I keep the path on plane and just keep the club face, if anything, closed to my rotation, just to get the ball coming out lower. However, the majority of times we want to use the bounce, we want to get a little bit more height on the golf ball, and then by doing so we need a good reference point, and that's a great reference point. So I don't need to look all the way over there. I know it doesn't feel like there's much, but I don't have to look much further now than where my hands are. Okay, so as I'm looking at where the rod is, I'm also getting a better sensation of how my hands are working, because I'm also looking at my hands as well. And then straight away I'm able to hit a couple of little pitches and get the ball just popping up so much higher off the club face, which is going to give me that softer landing. So even if I'm hitting a really short shot, the ball just takes off nice and high, lands quite softly, and I've just got that reference point here of exactly where the rod should be. So you could actually use the rod and the ball to get the feeling and the understanding of where you want it, and just practice kind of waist to waist, getting the club, getting it all into the right position. And then you could take the rod and the ball off, hit a couple of pitches and see if you get that higher chip shot, higher ball flight that you've been looking for. And then what you could also do is just go ahead and do some chipping and pitching with the very small rod on, just check it and then just hit. And that's, again, it's another great way of practicing. Just kind of take the club away, put the rod into position there, and then rotate through. And all I'm doing in terms of technique here is just allowing the club to work back down to the ground as my body rotates. So I'm basically using all parts of my body. I've got a good setup, I've got the weight on my left side, I've got my chest and my hips rotating together, the rod is up, so my hands have worked, and I've got all the rotation all the way through. And even just note there, where I'm stood on the follow through. I've got my hips pointing out to the target, got my belly button out to the target, my weight's on my left side, and this right foot is just turned into the toe. So now I've just got to make sure I've got plenty of rotation into my toe, and I've got a nice follow through. And that ball's only going around about 20 yards tops. All right, so this is that little pitch shot in and around the green. Got plenty of height on the golf ball, and it's just really smooth. But I'm also being able to use the bounce. I'm also allowing the bounce to glide through the grass. Oftentimes when you kind of really close that face up, not intentionally, but you kind of get really stiff wristed, you take the bounce out of play, and we see a lot of golfers then slam the leading edge down into the ground, and then by doing that you get your duff shots, and that's where I see a lot of duff shots. And then naturally, as you try and get away from duffing it, what takes over? The hands take over, pulling that leading edge up into the middle of the ball and thinning it across the other side. So you get fat and thin from the same fault, but you're almost just trying to stop one or the other. This side here, the way I try and think of it, I always say to people, think logically. If you're using your rotation of your hips, your knees, your stomach, your chest, your arms, your hands have got to follow. So everything stays exactly the same in the same movement or on the same degrees. Therefore, that club face, which has now got 54 degrees of loft on it, has effectively still got 54 degrees of loft on it here relative to the rest of my body. So if I can maintain that 54 degrees of loft all the way through the golf shot and even into the follow through, I'm going to get a little bit more height popping up off the face. If I rotate my body but not my hands, and I keep the rod pointing left and the club face closed, my body's rotated to try and maintain 54 degrees, but if my hands haven't moved, that club face has now lost loft, I've lost the bounce, and very simply I can dig into the ground. That's something we want to avoid. So very simple, but I think very effective in how you can understand how the hands move relative to the club. So you're effectively only really concentrating on this much of the golf club. You're working on how your grip moves, how your hands move on the grip, and how the rod reacts relative to what your hands are doing, and you work the two together, you start to build a lot more feel. And by improving this part of your game, you can improve your long game quite easily, and vice versa. By doing the long game drills, you can definitely improve on your short game as well. If you've got any questions on this, I've had loads of questions on this already as well, so I am going to answer them in the comments section below. If you do have questions on the gem rods in particular, like I said, I'm a massive fan of them. I do really like them, so I do endorse them in the way that if you are struggling with your takeaway, if you don't understand where the takeaway needs to be, it's definitely a training aid for you. So I would honestly implore you to go and give it a try. If you enjoyed this video, please do hit the like button, please subscribe to the channel, and from quite a windy but beautiful golf course here in Saudi, I'll see you again next time.